Yes.
So welcome to this ReMO seminar today on 30th of March. And the presentation will be by Haimanti Biswas from Goa in India. And the topic is the biological carbon pump in the central Arabian Sea. So welcome, Haimanti. We're looking forward to your talk.
Thank you, Iris. So thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm also excited to share whatever we understood about the biochemical functioning in the Central Arabian Sea. As you can see, I work in the National Institute of Oceanography, Goa, and we're like at 15 degrees north as the map is displayed, and the central dots represents our working area. So to begin with, I will briefly talk about the carbon pump, though I know most of the people are aware of this, how it works. But just to specify how much organic matter marine phytoplankton make every year, like out of 100 billion tons of global primary production, 40 to 50 petagram of carbon marine phytoplankton alone contribute. And that organic matter finally supports our fisheries. So $1 trillion of fisheries supported by marine phytoplankton, and a small fraction of that eventually sink down. And that support also the production of benthic biota. At the same time, that also captures carbon for a longer time scale. And this process from capturing carbon from the surface ocean to the deeper sea, we largely define as biological carbon pump. So to understand this entire process, we need to understand about every component: atmospheric forcing, hydrography, physicochemical parameters, nutrient stoichiometry, as well as the ecogeographic region of the marine system. So because of this, when we come to the Arabian Sea, this is very interesting area. As you can see this layer, the blue map that represents the external boundary of the oxygen minimum zone. This is one of the features because Arabian Sea, the upwelling regions are different, rather coupled with oxygen minimum zone, unlike Atlantic and Pacific. So this is the area of an intense ocean atmospheric coupling and direct influence of Indian monsoon winds, and also an area that experiences open ocean upwelling, which is not so common, and as well as coastal upwelling. So very high primary production is seen in particular places, and that also supports the livelihood for the surrounding countries. But as I mentioned, the upwelling regions are not coupled with oxygen minimum zone. So this is decoupled, and this oxygen minimum zone is also one of the persistent oxygen minimum zone. So all these processes make Arabian Sea very, very interesting, and that is why one of the, it has been one of the interesting place to attract oceanographers from all over the world. So we know that JGOV's program, under Joint Global Ocean Flux Study Program, a lot of cruises took place in this, including India JGOV's program. But in the last 2 decades, there has been any study in the Central Arabian Sea because of several logistical problems. However, and now to understand the process, whatever is going on here, the biochemistry, hydrography, as well as the atmospheric forcing, we need to understand a bit about the Indian monsoon system. Because we all know that because of the prolonged heating during particularly the pre-monsoon months, February, March, April, the intertropical convergence zone moves upward because the lowest low pressure develops on Earth. And that attracts the southeast trade wind, which crosses the equator and turns eventually to southwest monsoon wind, and that causes intense rainfall. Not only that if you see in this climatology of wind stress, during particularly July, August, that wind speed is very high, and that controls surface circulation in this entire North Indian Ocean, and particularly in the Arabian Sea as well as in the Bay of Bengal. And with reversal of monsoon wind, like in October, the monsoon wind withdraws and slowly the wind direction reverses completely, and it gets converted to northeast monsoon wind, which brings cold, dry wind from the continent. So the consequences of this monsoon wind system pattern on hydrography, biogeochemistry, as well as on fisheries are significant for all the surrounding countries. And that is why this area is very important to understand that what is happening. Not only that, during these summer months, as you can see, this is from August, a low-level atmospheric jet develops parallel to the Arabian Peninsula. This is addressed as fin-later jet, and the axis is where it experiences the maximum wind speed along 16 to 18 degree. And towards the north of the jet axis, because of the positive wind stress curl, it experiences open ocean upwelling. As the right panel indicates, you can see the wind stress curl. And in the, you can see these contour lines represent the mixed layer depth. So we see shallow mixed layer depth in the northwest flank of this fin-later jet axis. Contrarily, on the other hand, in the south, it develops downwelling because of the negative wind stress curl. So that is why high spatial variability is seen in most of the physical, chemical, and biological parameters in the central Arabian Sea during the summer monsoon months. And also patchiness in biological productivity. But during the winter monsoon, as I told, that the direction of the fin-later jet axis reverses and also the intensity of wind diminishes, and winter convective mixing happens here in the northern Arabian Sea. That is because of the heat loss and the dense and cool water that sinks, and then that creates the winter convective mixing. But that impact is restricted, not as and not as high as compared to southwest monsoon. But if you see the chlorophyll values here during particularly the summer and winter monsoon, it can be seen that during the summer monsoon, the Oman and Somali coast that becomes high productive, and we have open ocean upwelling here. And we also get in the southern coast of southwest coast of India coastal upwelling, but that mechanism is different. That happens because of the alongshore wind component. Whereas during the winter monsoon, due to the winter convective mixing, high productivity is observed in the northern part. So that is the reason during both summer monsoon and winter monsoon that this circle box, like the northern part of the Arabian Sea, becomes productive. So this is likely to receive high organic matter. And now what is happening? Why we are interested to understand the processes in the Arabian Sea? As you can see, I put here several examples. Like we all know the Indian Ocean is warming faster than any other major oceanic areas on globe. And not only that, because of the landlocked nature of the Arabian Sea, this area is also warming faster than anywhere else. And as you can see, this is the trend in increasing temperature, SST. This is degree centigrade per 37 years, and particularly, during the summer months and pre-monsoon months, a clear warming trend is seen. So now people started to understand that what are the consequences on physiography and the biogeochemistry, particularly the oxygen minimum zone as well as the primary production. So in this study, in the bottom in Progress in Oceanography published, so they have reviewed the literature as well as the satellite data for a decade, and they understood that there is a clear trend of increasing temperature in the lowest temperature zone during the upwelling, because the highest productive time is summer monsoon that brings cold nutrient-rich water to the surface. So that minimum temperature during upwelling time increased over a decade period, but they did not see any clear trend in phytoplankton biomass over this decade. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there is no change in phytoplankton community, because chlorophyll represent the bulk phytoplankton biomass. Now, there are some studies which also creates controversy, showing that the Arabian Sea is becoming productive during the northeast monsoon, but there is a regime shift because of these changes, as well as they also reported that there is a community shift from heterotrophic, and the heterotrophic dinoflagellate like Noctiluca is replacing diatoms because of the expansion of the hypoxic water towards the coast. However, there are also other studies that contradict it. And this is important to mention that most of the studies are done during the northeast monsoon, because during the summer monsoon, this is difficult to get the satellite imagery from this area. And as I explained that over almost last 2 decades, there was no study in this region. So with this challenge, what we thought that if we understand the atmospheric process or surface ocean process, as well as also what is happening in the surface sediment, probably we get to know whether there is any change in the biological carbon pump, or because of the spatial variability of the fin later jet, any change is going on, or what is the trend. So with this objective, we conducted this study. On the left side panel, I represent here the India JGOVS map that has been conducted in 1990s. And this is our sampling station. So under the same study, we have conducted the entire Indian coast. But in this presentation, I will mostly focus on the results which we got from the Central Arabian Sea. So as you can see, we have here 11 stations, and that we separated based on the axis of the fin later jet or the wind driven mixing, and also the mixed layer depth and nutrient stoichiometry. And we have taken here 3 cruises, 2 monsoon cruises as well as 1 winter monsoon cruise. But in this result, I will mostly focus on the summer monsoon cruises, but that is the most productive areas, most productive time of the year. And now what we wanted to understand, why we have taken 2 consecutive summer monsoon cruises, because we thought if we can capture the interannual variability in climatic factors as well as the phytoplankton community, organic matter, and also if we understand the the surface sediment, organic matter composition, that probably can give us some understanding that what could happen in future to some extent with variable climatic factors. To be more specific, we have collected all the parameters from surface water covering the water column. Here I will mostly focus on the euphotic layers where the biological productivity is maximum. So we analyzed most of the common parameters, for example, salinity, temperature, dissolved inorganic nutrients. We have also analyzed phytoplankton community using both microscopy as well as marker pigments by HPLC. We have also analyzed organic matter content, particulate organic matter and nitrogen, as well as their stable isotopes, as well as we have collected surface sediments from a multicorer, and then we analyze the phytodetritus composition from the pore top samples to link with atmospheric forcing, physicochemical parameters, as well as phytoplankton community. Now to come to the results, the first thing we need to see here, what kind of interannual variability we observe. As you can see here, there are 2 panels. The first panel represents August 27, and the second panel is 2017 and 18. So as clearly can be seen in the second panel that the reddish color, so the wind speed was much higher in 2018 compared to 17. As you can see, this paper, we discuss mostly how phytoplankton community composition is directly controlled by atmospheric forcing in this area. So this is one of the important studies because this has been conducted after 2 decades of JGOVS. And here in 2017 and 18, you can see the wind speed was maximum in the axis, that is, the both sides like 16 to 18 degree. So we separate these stations as north of fin later jet, axis of the fin later jet, and then north of the fin later jet. So the south of the fin later jet, sorry. So in the north of fin later jet, as I explained, that we experience open ocean upwelling, and in the middle, like axis of the fin later jet, experiences entrainment of nutrients because of the high wind speed, as well as advected nutrients from the coastal upwelling of Arabian Peninsula also reaches the Central Arabian Sea. That also we have captured through the stable isotope signature, which I will explain in the next slides. So now coming to the Ekman pumping velocity, which represents the upwelling intensity. So as I told, the north of fin later jet experiences Ekman suction. So because of that, we have cold, nutrient-rich and less oxygenated water coming up to the euphotic layers. And as you can see in August, because of the higher monsoon wind speed, the intensity of upwelling was also stronger. And that was also reflected that more colder water in the surface from the coastal area migrated or advected towards the central Arabian Sea. And this signature was also reflected in the mixed layer depth. Here in the bottom panel, we have the mixed layer depth. Here we have Ekman pumping velocity, and here we have the wind speed, which indicates clear difference in 2017 and 18. And this half-molar plot also indicates that offshore Ekman transport in 2018 was much higher. So that means the chances of receiving higher nutrients in 2018 compared to 2017. And now coming to the basic physical parameters, so temperature, dissolved oxygen and salinity. When I move from the left to right, this part represents the northern Arabian Sea, which experiences upwelling. This represents the middle bar, as you can see here, 16 degree, the axis of the Finleiter jet, and the leftmost part represents the south of the Finleiter jet. As you can see, the 17 panel and 18 panel clearly that here the D24 isotherm, the white contour was uplifted much shallower in 2018, indicating a stronger upwelling, as well as this is also part of the oxygen minimum zone, which brings more low oxygenated water close to the surface. And the salinity plot did not show much variability because in the general Arabian Sea experiences high salinity as the evaporative loss is much higher here than precipitation. However, because of the advection of the coastal water towards the central Arabian Sea and south, you can see the patch of the slightly low saline water is present here in the south of the Finleiter jet axis. Now coming to the nutrient stoichiometry, because this is the basic parameter that drives phytoplankton bloom. So as you can see here, the nitrate, this is 5 micromole contour, which was much shallower in 2018. Same with dissolved inorganic phosphate as well as dissolved inorganic silicate. And this is important to mention here that in the Arabian Sea, because of the strong denitrification in the oxygen minimum zone, the nitrogen is the limiting nutrient, as phosphorus never gets depleted, but first nitrate gets depleted and then followed by dissolved silicate. So because of that, this is important to understand what kind of nutrient stoichiometry the atmospheric forcing is distributing. So based on that, as you can see, the south of the Finleiter jet axis mostly receive low nutrient concentration. This part also receives some nutrients from the advection, but that directly depends on the wind speed. But the axis of the Finleiter jet, as you can see here, that experiences or receives stronger wind speed, and also the entrainment adds up enough nutrient to the surface. So that is why likely the northern part of the Finleiter jet as well as axis of the Finleiter jet may develop higher amount of phytoplankton biomass compared to the southern part. Now coming to the phytoplankton biomass, as you can see here, the chlorophyll concentration for 2017 and 18, the northern part is significantly high chlorophyll concentration in both the years, and also the axis has relatively less chlorophyll concentration, but the southern part shows the least amount of chlorophyll concentration. And this is directly related to nutrient supply. And now, as I explained that the some amount of nutrient was coming also from the advection from the Somali and Oman coast, we have analyzed the delta 13C of particulate organic matter. And as you can see, there are differences between 17 and 18, as the values are depleted in 17, whereas the values are higher in 2018. Why this happened and what does it indicate? In 2018, the monsoon onset was delayed because of one cyclone Athira, and that is why the nutrient injection to the euphotic layer took place later compared to 2017. We have conducted 2 cruises almost at the same time, though this difference was seen, and the organic matter I will show in the next slide. So this indicates probably the phytoplankton bloom was more matured in 2017 because of the early onset of monsoon, whereas because of the young or developing bloom, these values were still on the higher side. But interestingly, the delta 15N signature, which represents the nitrogen source phytoplankton absorb, as you can see, the values are much higher towards the north. that indicates the nitrogen source, dissolved inorganic nitrogen that they have utilized must have come from the regenerated nitrogen. So if you recall the earlier slide where the nitrate plus nitrite concentration was showing higher concentration this side, because from the oxygen minimum zone a significant amount of nitrate plus nitrite was added to the surface layer, and that was consumed by phytoplankton, and that is why those values are much higher compared to the rest of the transit. Not only that, the axis of the Finley shows the delta 15 in values, which resembles like 5 to 6 per mil, which resembles the coastal upwelling, because they do not have necessarily denitrification zone there, because the oxygen minimum zone and high productive areas are not coupled. So in that case, this signature also indicates that a significant amount of nitrogen was supplied by advected nitrogen, which came via the surface current and driven by wind speed. And now coming to the distribution of the particulate organic matter, we can see here the values are much higher in 2017 compared to 18. And that can be explained also by the onset of the monsoon, because in August already the monsoon onsets in June, and then July it peaks, and August usually we get to see the phytoplankton bloom. That is why we investigated this entire thing during the month of August. And here the bloom was already matured, and that is why probably the phytoplankton biomass was very high, or the POC was high compared to 2018. Not only that, when we did a ratio here, I have not shown chlorophyll is to POC. The POC contribution to total phytoplankton biomass was high compared to chlorophyll A. That also indicates that a matured bloom was documented in 2017 compared to 2018. And the particulate organic nitrogen also revealed a very similar trend, and carbon is to nitrogen ratio was very much in line with marine signature, like 6.63. Now with this, we wanted to know what was the contribution of different groups of phytoplankton, and we have done both microscopy as well as marker pigment by HPLC. Here you can see the phytomicro, nano and pico phytoplankton contribution to total chlorophyll A were calculated based on the marker pigment concentrations. As you can see here, the contribution of microphytoplankton was very high in the northern side compared to the axis and southern side. Whereas, interestingly, the picophytoplankton, they are mostly the picocyanobacteria, Prochlorococcus and Synechococcus, as indicated by their marker pigment, were higher in the southern part. Not only that, as 2017, because of the weak monsoon, the temperature was warmer in the southern side. So that was supporting picophytoplankton growth in this area. So that also gives a hint that in future, because of the warming of the Arabian Sea, this kind of picocyanobacteria may dominate and replace other phytoplankton, because with warming, we may expect more stratified water with less nutrient. And because of that, smaller phytoplankton can grow better as they have higher surface areas to volume ratio compared to the larger phytoplankton cell. So these north-south gradient in phytoplankton composition as well as organic matter would make significant difference in also carbon export flux that is reaching the sediment. So to understand that, we also investigated in detail the phytoplankton composition. As you can see, the microscopic cell counts are very high in the north compared to the south, whereas the dinoflagellate occurrences was almost throughout, because dinoflagellate can grow in wider range of niche, because they can also grow in low temperature, high temperature, low nutrient as well as high nutrient, and many of dinoflagellates are mixotrophic. So when nutrients are depleted, they can eventually convert their metabolism to heterotrophy, so they can also prey on smaller phytoplankton. That is why probably the entire transect was full with dinoflagellates, whereas diatoms were restricted towards the north. And if we do a ratio of diatom to dinoflagellate, the northern part also showed the highest number in this case. And also in 2017, as you can see, this ratio was higher compared to 2018. Now we wanted to know more about the centric and pinnate diatom, as we know that the centrics are the usually the round shape and the pinnates are narrower with the smaller shells, because they have different potential of sinking. And the centric heavily silicified diatom can sink faster to the sediment. So if you have higher centric diatom dominance, we may expect higher detritus flux. That we'll see in the next slide. So when you did a ratio between centric and pinnate, we clearly see that the northern part was occupied by higher or the larger contribution of centric diatom compared to pinnate, whereas pinnate diatoms were higher in the north, but throughout the transect their absence or presence was recorded. Now what we have done particular, like based on their size as well as the other mixed layer depth, other physicochemical parameters, as I explained, we also try to match whether there is any particular group of phytoplankton that occupy north of fin later jet, axis of fin later jet, and south of fin later jet. And these two pie charts, the first one represent 2017 and the second one represent 2018. And these two images, one represent Cosmodiscus radiatus. This is a very large centric diatom. It grows only in silica-rich water, particularly in the upwelling regions, and also Rhizosolenium imbricata. This is another diatom which can be very long. Almost it can grow to 0.5 to 1 millimeter sometimes. And because of their high ballast, they have potential to sink faster. And here you can see the blue patch here in this first pie chart. This is indicated. This is indicating Cosmodiscus radiatus, and here we have the Rhizosolenia hibitata and imbricata. These two green and the violet color. So that indicates in the axis and north of the fin later jet, these large diatoms dominated. Whereas in the south of the fin later jet, mostly the heterotrophic and smaller dinoflagellate that dominated. So that means this spatial difference in phytoplankton community composition will definitely have consequences on carbon export flux. Now to do more, we have compared with the earlier JGOPS data, which is available from the literature, to compare whether there is any significant change in species composition over the last 2 decades, because that was not studied in between. And we realized that our results are very much in consistence with earlier reports. That means during the summer monsoon, we did not find any significant community shift in the euphotic phytoplankton community. And hence our study argues against a complete regime shift in this region. And to understand the interannual variability between 2017 and 18, we also take a look into the zooplankton abundance. This is for the top 200 meter. And we also noticed that in 2018, zooplankton biomass was significantly low compared to 2017. And that could be just because of the difference in monsoon onset timing. As I explained that in 2017, the bloom was already matured and phytoplankton POC, the particulate organic matter, was high. And that could also be because of the reason that they are mostly graced. Whereas during the 2018 cruise, the phytoplankton was still maturing and the nutrients were still plenty. And because of that, the zooplankton grazing did not pick up. And the size of phytoplankton could be also another factor that I will explain in the next slide. So in this schematic, what we try to explain, as you can see here 2018 on the left panel, we are trying to explain the situation which we experienced during 2018, where wind forcing was high. And on the right side, we have low wind forcing in 2017. And during stronger upwelling with higher wind speed, with that entire axis of the fin later jet as well as northern part of the fin later jet, that may experience higher amount of nutrient injection to the euphotic layer. And that may promote larger diatom growth like Cosmodiscus radiatus and Rhizosolenia. And this is also important to mention that the zooplankton grazing is directly dependent on the size of their prey. So usually this is 18:1. So when the phytoplankton, they are growing in high silicate enriched environment, then their radius is higher because, to avoid grazing also, they enlarge their size. And in that case, we assume in 2018, the growth of larger diatom probably helped them to avoid grazing, and that, we can anticipate a higher amount of phytodetritus flux to the sediment. Whereas during the low and moderate wind, moderate or the, not like if you compare with 2018, less amount of nutrient was injected in surface layer. And because of that, moderate size of phytoplankton grew. And for zooplankton, that would be easier to graze them. So in that case, the carbon flow could be more towards trophic transfer instead of downward flux. Now we wanted to link this to our sedimentary data. So from this, what we assume that these three locations, the moderate wind speed in the north of the Findlater jet, highest wind speed in the axis of the Findlater jet, and the low wind speed in the south of the Findlater jet will have direct consequence on the composition of phytodetritus. So in that case, the larger diatoms that will definitely have more potential to sink faster, and in case of their larger size, they can also graze. Whereas in axis also the contribution of diatom is relatively less than north, but not as less as south. So in that case, these three separate components of micro, pico, and nano phytoplankton are different in organic matter, and that is likely to impact also the organic matter, which is further sinking from the upper euphotic zone to the upper mesopelagic, and then that goes further to the lower mesopelagic. And with this paper, they have investigated that in the Arabian Sea, and there are also other papers by Kevan et al., and I'm sure many of you know this, that during their travel, the organic matter, when it travels from the euphotic layer to the mesopelagic, the presence of oxygen determines its fluxes, because the oxygen deficient waters will decrease the attenuation of flux, and that is why, and also the microbial mineralization could be slow, and that is the reason higher amount of organic matter will reach the sediment. So in this case, they have that floating sediment they have used, and then they used a model, and they concluded that in the upper water column, the microbial community determines the initial flux attenuation, and in the deeper water, it depends on zooplankton, because they are grazing, fragmentation, and again the microbial remineralization. But how it works, it's still not clear. So that is why we didn't have a clear view of how organic matter, when it is reaching the sediment, what kind of quantity or the quality. So to understand it better, we have now analyzed 5 pore top sediments from the same axis. As you can see here, the total organic carbon and total nitrogen, which is represented here. So these stations are under north of Findlater jet axis. Very clearly, it shows high amount of organic matter and organic nitrogen. And also here, axis of the Findlater jet is also more or less comparable because of high productivity. Whereas in the north of Findlater, south of Findlater jet, we can see the organic matter content is low as expected. So now we have analyzed the diatom frostules from the surface sediment to understand what kind of frostules are reaching. Because if a significant amount of frostules are grazed, then what are the frostules that must be reaching the sediment in these locations? So as you can see here, we found in the northern side very large diatoms, and they just sink because it's difficult to graze them because of their large size. Whereas in the south, we found very less amount of diatom valves or frostules. And not only that, the smaller pinnate diatoms are found throughout, but if you do a ratio centric is to pinnate, pinnates are more abundant here, and also the chain forming centric diatom, which are smaller in size. So then we ask a question following that literature, is it the only high production which drives higher amount of organic carbon, or also the presence of oxygen minimum zone which influences this flux? So to understand this, we separated the community here, and we, as I explained there, as you can see, the phytodetritus was mostly dominated by large diatoms like Cosonoiscus radiatus as well as Rhizosolenia. While moving southward, we had small chain-forming diatoms like Thalassiosira as well as Nitschia. We know that for grazing, phytoplankton have particular preference. Like those phytoplankton, they form chain because this is also a strategy to avoid grazing because it gives the total volume high. At the same time, there are some phytoplankton, for example, Pseudomycia nischia, that they produce toxin, and that is also thought to be one of the mechanisms to avoid grazing. So that could be the reason why in the north, the large diatoms could escape grazing and sink because of their large size, whereas in the south, some other strategies probably are used by phytoplankton to avoid grazing, and they sank eventually. Now we have compared the euphotic phytoplankton diversity with the diversity which you found in the surface sediment. And we see there is a significant difference. And what does it tell us? So we understood that probably the other bloom forming diatom, for example, Chaetoceras. So this is from the surface sediment and this is from the water column. And this is the average from the north and also from the south. So when we analyze this, we realize that the bloom forming diatoms, for example, Frazillaria or for example Chaetoceras, they can be grazed faster compared to the other phytoplankton, for example, Cosnodiscus and Rhizosolenia or Thalassiosida, that can easily escape grazing. So what are the species finally contributing to sedimentary phytodetritus flux is dependent also on their cell size as well as different strategies to avoid grazing. And now this is the first set of data. This work we are doing also the sterile analysis. The brassica-sterile represents diatom and dinosterile represents dinoflagellate. This study we are doing in collaboration with the Hamburg University with Dr. Birgit. She has worked extensively in the Arabian Sea productivity for a long time, also under the Jacobs program. And as you can see here, this is 21 degree received the highest amount of both dinosterile and brassica-sterile. So that also confirmed our theory that the northern part of the fin-later jet axis is not only productive high, but organic matter flux is also high there. Usually in the other productive areas, the attenuation of flux is also very high because of the microbial respiration in the upper mesopelagy. But in the case of Arabian Sea, this is not similar because, here in this schematic we try to explain, our two stations were from this, where we have intense oxygen minimum zone in the north of the fin-later jet, and when you move southward, in 10 degrees, the oxygen minimum zone fades away. So if you take two sections of these areas, here the large diatoms grow mostly because of the advected nutrients as well as upwelling, and that supports also the heavily silicification because of supply of dissolved silicate, and that is why they can easily escape grazing. Not only that, when the organic matter is traveling to the oxygen minimum zone, the remineralization rate is significantly low because of lack of oxygen. Not only that, the abundance of zooplankton is also less because only some particular zooplankton are acclimatized to grow in low oxygen environment. And that is why probably in the north of the fin-later jet axis, despite high primary production, the remineralization within the water column would be significantly less compared to the southern part. And also the activity of zooplankton, which accelerates the flux attenuation, would be less. And that is why the phytodetritus with large diatoms sink easily to the ocean floor, and they can be restored because of the oxygen minimum zone. On the contrary, in the southern part, already the phytoplankton cell size is smaller. They could be grazed easily by zooplankton. Not only that, when they travel, they go through a well oxygenated water, and that is why the rate of mineralization could also be high, and the zooplankton abundance is also higher compared to the northern part because it is well oxygenated water. And all together, probably the attenuation of flux could be very high in this water column, and that leads to the low particle flux with moderate and small diatoms to the southern part. So to conclude with, the key observations are: atmospheric forcing plays a key role in shaping the phytoplankton community in this area. High spatial and interannual variability in phytoplankton communities may directly influence organic matter flux. And in case of stronger monsoon winds, in 2017 can give an example about a low monsoon or weak monsoon wind that is predicted because of the temperature gradient with land and sea warming. And in that case, when you have higher or stronger wind, then higher nutrient concentration will be in the euphotic layer, and that can promote large diatom growth. They can escape easily and can rapidly sink to the sediment floor, and consequently higher amount of phytodetritus after reaching the abyssal plain compared to the south, and this is consistent with the sedimentary organic carbon and nitrogen content. Not only that, the presence of the intense oxygen minimum zone towards the north could reduce particle flux attenuation with a consequent increase in phytodetritus transport to the sediment. Now the next thing what we are studying another group that okay, before that, one more point. In the south, the increasing SST, if you recall that the picocyanobacteria was associated with warming temperature, so in that south, the increasing SST may induce more picocyanobacteria and may directly impact the trophic transfer, carbon export and carbon cycling, because in that case the lability of organic matter may also change when there is a shift from diatom and dinoflagellate to more to cyanobacteria. And not only that, this north-south variability in diatom-rich phytodetritus flux to the sediment may impact the benthic biota, because that will change, the qualitatively that will impact the benthic biodiversity because of different nutritional quality as well as lability of organic matter, which is produced by a diatom-dominated community or a cyanobacteria-dominated community. And in the current view of the expansion of the oxygen minimum zone, the particle flux attenuation can be less in some regions, and that could have a negative feedback to climate warming. And with this, I must thank the SCORE working group for giving me this opportunity to present this work. And I am also thankful to our director for supporting this study, and all onboard participants, and of course my beloved students. Here Devasmita, Aziz, and then we have Soumya, Diksha, Bintu, and Medhavi. So most of them left, and only she is still working. So thank you very much, and I'll be very happy to take any question and suggestions. Thanks a lot.